The teen shot. During a bike ride, the unsolved murder of Ellis Cox. On a warm summer evening in June 2024, 19-year-old Ellis Cox left home to spend time with friends. There was nothing unusual about that day. The weather was good. School was over. Summer had arrived in Merseyside. Like many teenagers, Ellis grabbed his bike and headed out. A few hours later, he would be dead. And nearly 2 years later, despite multiple arrests, police would still be searching for the person who pulled the trigger. This is the story of Ellis Cox, a young man whose life ended in a place few people had ever heard of, a murder that shattered a family, and an investigation that still has more questions than answers. On the evening of June 23rd, 2024, Ellis was riding around Aintree with friends. According to his family, he loved being outdoors, fishing, camping, off-road driving, spending time with relatives. He was the kind of young man who rarely went anywhere without family nearby. Those who knew him described him as loyal, caring, and protective. A son, a brother, a nephew, an uncle, a best friend. Nobody imagined that this ordinary summer evening would become the last day of his life. As darkness fell, Ellis and his friends made their way toward the Liver industrial estate. The industrial area sits among warehouses and businesses. By night, the streets become quiet. Few people are around. The kind of place where witnesses are hard to find. Shortly after 11 p.m., something happened. Investigators believe there was some form of confrontation involving a group of young men. Exactly what was said remains unclear. Exactly who was present remains unclear. But what happened next changed everything. A gun was produced. A shot was fired. Ellis was struck. The bullet entered his back. Chaos followed. Emergency services were called immediately. Paramedics rushed to the scene. Police officers arrived within minutes. Life-saving treatment began on the roadside. Every second mattered. Ellis was still just 19 years old. He was transported to hospital as quickly as possible. Doctors fought to save him, but his injuries were too severe. Despite every effort, Ellis Cox died. News of the shooting spread rapidly across Merseyside. Another young life had been taken. Another family had received the worst phone call imaginable. For Ellis's loved ones, the world stopped. The teenager who had left home on his bicycle was never coming back. In the days that followed, detectives launched a major murder investigation. Crime scene officers examined the industrial estate. Roads were closed. Witnesses were interviewed. CCTV footage was collected. Officers worked through the night. The first challenge was simple. Who had fired the gun? And why? At first, very little information was released publicly. Investigators carefully pieced together the final hours of Ellis's life. They mapped his movements. They tracked his friends. They reviewed phone records. They searched for surveillance cameras. Every clue mattered. Yet almost immediately, detectives faced a familiar problem: fear. In cases involving firearms, witnesses are often reluctant to speak. Some fear retaliation. Others simply do not want involvement. Silence can become the biggest obstacle. And silence appeared to surround the death of Ellis Cox. Weeks turned into months. The investigation continued. Detectives carried out searches. Suspects were identified. Arrests followed. But no breakthrough came. No murder charge was announced. No trial date was set. For the family, the waiting became unbearable. Every day brought the same question. Who killed Ellis? Every birthday. Every Christmas. Every family gathering. The empty chair remained. As investigators continued working behind the scenes, the family publicly appealed for information. They wanted answers. They wanted justice. Most importantly, they wanted someone to come forward. The image of Ellis became familiar across Merseyside. A smiling teenager. A young man with his entire future ahead of him. His family repeatedly described the person he was. Not a headline. Not a statistic. A real human being. Someone deeply loved. Someone deeply missed. As the first anniversary approached, there was still no resolution. The killer remained unidentified, or at least uncharged. Police maintained that the investigation was active. Leads were still being followed. Information was still being assessed. But publicly, little appeared to be changing. Then came a significant development. Crime Stoppers announced a reward of up to £20,000 for information leading to convictions. Rewards of that size are not offered lightly. Investigators clearly believed that someone knew the truth. Someone had seen what happened. Someone had heard conversations afterwards. Someone knew who was responsible. The reward was designed to encourage that person to finally speak. But still, the case remained unresolved. As 2025 progressed, the investigation entered its second year. The number of arrests continued to grow. One suspect after another was questioned. Some were released under investigation. Others remained connected to the inquiry. Yet none of the arrests produced the breakthrough the family desperately wanted. The mystery deepened. How could so many people be linked to the case while nobody faced trial? Was the investigation getting closer? Or were detectives still missing the crucial piece of evidence? Then came another heartbreaking moment. The day Ellis should have celebrated his 21st birthday. Instead of celebrating, his family were once again speaking publicly about their loss. His mother gave emotional interviews, at times struggling to hold back tears. At one point she simply described him as her baby. Those words carried enormous weight. No matter how old a child becomes, parents never stop seeing them that way. For her, time had not healed the wound. The grief remained as powerful as ever. Meanwhile, detectives continued building their case. Behind every public update were countless hours of investigative work, phone analysis, digital evidence, witness statements, forensic examinations, vehicle movements, social media activity. Modern murder investigations often rely on far more than eyewitness testimony. A single phone location, a deleted message, a surveillance camera. Any one of these pieces could eventually unlock the truth. Then, in June 2026, nearly 2 years after the shooting, police announced another arrest. A 31-year-old man from Walton had been detained on suspicion of conspiracy to murder. The arrest marked the 9th person taken into custody during the investigation. 9th. That number immediately attracted attention. 9 arrests, yet still no convictions. No public identification of the shooter. No courtroom resolution. Detective Chief Inspector Steve Wilkinson made it clear that the investigation was far from over. He emphasized that Ellis's family had now lived for nearly 2 years without justice. He renewed calls for information. He urged anyone with knowledge to come forward. His message was simple. The investigation remains active, and the search for those responsible continues. One question continues to hang over the case. Was Ellis the intended target, or was he simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? Police have never publicly revealed enough information to answer that question. Some reports suggest a confrontation preceded the shooting, but the exact circumstances remain unclear. If Ellis was targeted, why? If he was not targeted, then who was? And who decided that a firearm should be used that night? Those unanswered questions have become central to the mystery. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the case is the passage of time. Murder investigations are often measured in hours, days, weeks, not years. Yet as the second anniversary approaches, Ellis's family still wakes up every day without answers. The people responsible know what happened. The witnesses know what happened. Somewhere the truth exists. The challenge for investigators is proving it. The murder of Ellis Cox is not just a story about a shooting. It is a story about a family trapped in uncertainty. A mother waiting for justice. A community waiting for answers. And detectives refusing to give up. 2 years later, the investigation remains alive. 9 arrests have been made. Police continue following leads. And the family continues hoping that one day a knock on the door will finally bring the news they have been waiting for. The question is whether that day will ever come. Because somewhere in Merseyside, someone knows exactly what happened at the Liver Industrial Estate on that June night. Someone knows who fired the fatal shot. And until that person is identified and convicted, the murder of Ellis Cox will remain one of Merseyside's most troubling unsolved cases. For now, the file remains open. The investigation continues, and the search for justice goes on. For investigators, the most frustrating murder cases are not always the ones with no suspects. Sometimes the hardest cases are the ones where detectives believe they know far more than they can prove. The Ellis Cox investigation appears to sit somewhere in that uncomfortable space. By the time the 9th arrest was announced, detectives had spent nearly 24 months examining every possible lead. That level of activity does not happen without reason. Every arrest requires evidence. Every search warrant requires justification. Every interview is based on information gathered during the investigation. Yet despite all of that work, prosecutors have not stood before a jury and presented a murder case. That reality raises an important question. What exactly is missing? In modern criminal investigations, proving guilt often requires more than simply identifying a suspect. Detectives must establish a complete chain of evidence. Who was present? Who possessed the weapon? Who planned the attack? Who encouraged it? Who helped afterwards? And perhaps most importantly, can all of that be proven beyond reasonable doubt? A single weak link can be enough to prevent charges. A witness may refuse to testify. A phone may be destroyed. A camera may have captured only part of the incident. A suspect may remain silent. Any one of these factors can dramatically slow an investigation. Police have repeatedly stated that people within the community may hold vital information. That statement is often carefully chosen. It suggests investigators believe answers already exist among those connected to the case. The challenge is convincing those people to speak. For the Cox family, however, legal complexities matter little compared with the loss they have suffered. Every public appeal reveals the same thing. They are not searching for revenge. They are searching for truth. When families speak after a murder, they often describe what was taken from them. In Ellis's case, the picture is painfully clear. A young man entering adulthood. A future never lived. Milestones never reached. A 21st birthday that became another reminder of absence rather than celebration. Friends moved forward with their lives. Some found careers, others started families. But Ellis's story stopped on a summer night in 2024. That is what makes unsolved murders so devastating. Death is not the only tragedy. The uncertainty becomes a second burden. Families replay events repeatedly in their minds. What happened? Why did it happen? Could it have been prevented? Who knows the truth? Those questions can last decades. Across the United Kingdom, there are families still waiting for answers 20 or 30 years after losing loved ones. Investigators in Merseyside are determined not to let that happen here. The decision to continue making arrests suggests the case remains active and significant. Police resources are limited. Cases that lose momentum often fade from headlines. The Ellis Cox investigation has not disappeared. Instead, detectives continue returning to it. That persistence indicates they still believe justice is achievable. Another aspect of the case that continues to attract attention is the location itself. The Liver Industrial Estate is not the kind of place most people associate with a murder mystery. By day, it is an ordinary commercial area. By night, however, it becomes isolated. The lack of pedestrian traffic creates challenges for investigators. Fewer witnesses, fewer opportunities to reconstruct events, fewer people capable of explaining exactly what happened. Criminal investigations often depend upon chance. A passing driver, a security guard, a delivery worker, a resident looking through a window. Without those witnesses, detectives must rely heavily on forensic evidence and digital records. That process takes time, sometimes years, and in the Ellis Cox case, time continues to pass. The arrest announced in June 2026 may not be the last. Police have given no indication that their investigation is nearing an end. Additional suspects could still emerge. New evidence could still be discovered. Technology could uncover information previously hidden. Cases that appear stalled can suddenly change overnight. History is filled with examples. A forgotten witness comes forward. A former associate decides to cooperate. A suspect makes a mistake. A conversation is overheard. A conscience becomes too heavy to carry. Any one of those events can transform an investigation. Perhaps that possibility explains why Ellis's family continues speaking publicly. Every appeal serves a purpose. Every interview keeps the case alive. Every photograph reminds people that a real person was lost. The hope is simple, that someone watching, someone listening, someone carrying information will finally decide that enough is enough. And if that happens, the entire case could change. Until then, the murder of Ellis Cox remains a painful reminder of how quickly life can change. One moment, a teenager was enjoying a summer evening with friends. A few hours later, detectives were investigating a homicide. The distance between those two moments was measured in seconds. A single gunshot, a single decision, a single act of violence, and the consequences have lasted years. As this story continues to unfold, one fact remains unchanged. Ellis Cox never came home from that bike ride. His family still waits for answers. Police still pursue those responsible. And somewhere the truth still exists. The question is whether it will emerge before another year passes, or whether this case will join the long list of British murders that remained unsolved far longer than anyone ever imagined. For now, the investigation remains open. The 9th arrest has been made. The search continues. and the name Ellis Cox remains at the centre of one of Merseyside's most persistent murder investigations. Until justice arrives, the story is not over. To understand why this case continues to resonate across Merseyside, it is important to look beyond the investigation itself. Because for many people, the murder of Ellis Cox represents something larger. It reflects a growing fear about how quickly violence can erupt among young people. On the surface, June 23rd, 2024 looked like an ordinary summer night. Friends were outside enjoying the warm weather. Families were relaxing at home. Nothing suggested that a teenager would be fatally shot before midnight. Yet that is often how these tragedies unfold. There is no warning, no headline beforehand, no indication that a routine evening is about to become a crime scene. When police officers arrived at the Liver Industrial Estate, they were not simply responding to another emergency call. They were stepping into a case that would consume hundreds, perhaps thousands of investigative hours. Every murder leaves a trail. The challenge is following it. Detectives would have immediately begun asking the same fundamental questions. Who was present? Who left before police arrived? Who contacted whom afterwards? Who suddenly changed their behaviour? Who had a motive? Who had access to a firearm? Those questions form the backbone of every homicide investigation. Sometimes the answers come quickly. Sometimes they take years. The fact that police continue making arrests suggests they believe the answers are gradually emerging. But there is another side to this story, a side that rarely appears in official statements. The psychological impact on those connected to the case. Consider the friends who were with Ellis that night. Many young people witness traumatic events and spend years struggling to process them. Some develop anxiety. Some experience survivor's guilt. Some replay the moment repeatedly in their minds, wondering whether anything could have been done differently. For them, the shooting did not end in June 2024. Its effects may last a lifetime. The same is true for family members. Criminologists often describe homicide as a crime with hundreds of victims. Only one person loses their life, but dozens of others carry the consequences. Parents, siblings, grandparents, partners, friends. Each experiences the loss differently. Each carries their own unanswered questions. In interviews, Ellis's family consistently focused on the person he was rather than the way he died. That distinction matters. Many murder victims become known only through the circumstances of their deaths. Their identities become overshadowed by headlines. Families often work hard to prevent that from happening. They want people to remember the life, not just the crime. In Ellis's case, they described a young man who loved fishing, who enjoyed camping, who valued family, who remained loyal to those closest to him. Those details may seem small, but they help explain why his loss continues to be felt so deeply. Behind every investigation is a life interrupted, a future erased, and perhaps that is what makes this case so compelling. There is no dramatic courtroom verdict, no confession, no public explanation, just a family waiting, a police force searching, and a community wondering when answers will finally arrive. The 9th arrest announced in 2026 has renewed attention on the investigation. Some observers see it as a sign of progress. Others see it as the evidence of how difficult the case remains. Both interpretations may be true. Complex murder investigations often move slowly, especially when multiple suspects are involved, especially when conspiracy allegations are being examined, especially when detectives must build a case capable of surviving scrutiny in court. A rushed prosecution can fail. An incomplete case can collapse. Investigators know that, which is why they continue gathering evidence rather than chasing headlines. For now, the public knows only fragments of the story. Somewhere within police files are witness statements, phone records, forensic reports, interview transcripts, intelligence assessments, pieces of information that have not been released publicly. Those pieces may already reveal what happened, or they may still be missing the crucial detail needed to complete the picture. Only investigators know for certain. What the public does know is simple. A 19-year-old lost his life. His family lost a son. And 2 years later, justice remains unfinished. As another anniversary approaches, detectives continue urging anyone with information to come forward. That appeal has become a recurring theme throughout the investigation. Not because police lack determination, but because someone, somewhere, may still hold the final missing piece. A name, a conversation, a message, a memory. Something that seemed insignificant at the time. but could prove critical today. History shows that many murder cases are eventually solved because one person decides to speak. Not because new technology appears, not because investigators get lucky, but because silence finally breaks. Perhaps that will happen here. Perhaps the next arrest will bring the breakthrough investigators have been pursuing for nearly 2 years. Or perhaps the case will continue into a 3rd year, carrying the same unanswered questions. At this stage, nobody can say. What is certain is that the story of Ellis Cox is not finished. The investigation remains active. The search for justice continues. And until those responsible are identified, charged, and convicted, his family will continue living with the same painful question that began on a summer night in 2024. Who killed Ellis Cox? And why? For now, those answers remain hidden. But somewhere in Merseyside, the truth still exists, waiting to be uncovered, waiting to be spoken, and waiting, perhaps, for the moment when this case finally reaches its conclusion. Thank you for watching. If you have followed this case, let us know your thoughts below. And if new developments emerge in the investigation, we will continue to follow them closely. Because until justice is delivered, the story of Ellis Cox remains unfinished. There is another question that investigators rarely discuss publicly. What happened after the shooting? Because in many murder cases, the actions taken in the minutes and hours after a crime can be just as revealing as the crime itself. When a shooting occurs, panic is common. Phones begin ringing. Messages are sent. People disappear from the area. Stories begin changing. And investigators know this. That is why detectives often spend months reconstructing not only the crime itself, but everything that happened afterwards. Who contacted whom? Who suddenly switched off a phone? Who deleted messages? Who met with friends unexpectedly? Who left the area? These behavioral clues can become powerful evidence. Former homicide detectives often describe murder investigations as giant puzzles. The shooting itself may last only seconds, but the behavior that follows can continue for days, weeks, or even years. And people under pressure make mistakes. They talk. They boast. They confide in friends. They tell different versions of events. Eventually, those inconsistencies attract attention. That may be one reason why police continue making arrests almost 2 years after Ellis's death. Investigators may be uncovering information that was not available during the early stages of the inquiry. Every arrest creates opportunities. Every interview produces new information. Even suspects who refuse to answer questions can sometimes provide valuable evidence through their reactions, movements, and communications. Another possibility is that detectives are examining whether more than one person was involved. Modern murder investigations frequently focus not only on the individual who carried out an attack, but also on anyone who assisted before or afterwards. Who supplied information? Who helped organize meetings? Who encouraged violence? Who helped suspects avoid detection? Those questions become increasingly important when conspiracy offences are being investigated. And in the Ellis Cox case, police have specifically made arrests linked to conspiracy to murder. That detail suggests detectives may be looking beyond a single gunman. They may be examining a wider network of individuals connected to the events of that night. Of course, investigators cannot simply rely on suspicion. Every allegation must be supported by evidence. Every claim must withstand legal scrutiny. That process takes time, sometimes much longer than families expect. But investigators know that a failed prosecution can be almost as damaging as no prosecution at all, which is why patience often becomes an essential part of the process. For Ellis's family, however, patience comes at a cost. Every month without answers is another month of uncertainty. Every new arrest raises hope. Every delay creates frustration. It is an emotional cycle that many families of murder victims know all too well. Hope, waiting, disappointment, renewed hope, and then more waiting. Yet despite those challenges, the family has continued speaking publicly. They have continued appealing for information, and they have continued reminding the public who Ellis really was. Not simply a victim, not simply a case number, but a young man whose future was stolen, a teenager who should now be planning the next chapter of his life. Instead, detectives are still trying to understand the final chapter. Perhaps one day a jury will hear the full story. Perhaps the evidence will finally come together. Perhaps the family will finally hear the words they have waited years to hear. Guilty. But until that day arrives, the murder of Ellis Cox remains an open wound. a case that refuses to disappear, a family that refuses to give up, and an investigation that continues searching for the truth hidden somewhere within the events of a single summer night in Merseyside. Because after 2 years, 9 arrests, countless interviews, and thousands of hours of investigative work, one question still remains unanswered. Who killed Ellis Cox? And when that answer finally comes, it may reveal far more than anyone currently expects.